Ask most Americans which party freed the slaves, and they'll say the Republicans. Ask who built the welfare state, and they'll say the Democrats. Both are right and wrong. Over 160 years, the political compass of the United States spun like a weather vane in a storm. The party of Lincoln became the party of the South. The party of FDR became the party of Silicon Valley. This isn't a conspiracy theory or a simple swap. It's the story of realignment, a century and a half of political migration, ideology, and identity. Tonight, on the political time machine, when the parties switched. To understand how the parties switched, you first need to see how different they once were, not just in policy, but in soul. The 1850s. America is splitting along a single question. Slavery. Not whether it's wrong. Plenty of Northerners don't care about that. But whether it should expand into new territories. The issue isn't just moral, it's economic and political. New states mean new senators. New senators tip the balance. In 1854, the Republican Party forms in Ripon, Wisconsin. It's a coalition of former Whigs, Free Soilers, and anti-slavery Democrats united by one principle: stop slavery's expansion. By 1860, they've nominated Abraham Lincoln, a lawyer from Illinois who speaks in measured paragraphs about union and moral obligation. The Democratic Party, meanwhile, has become the vehicle for Southern slaveholding interests and the doctrine of states' rights, the idea that federal power should yield to local sovereignty, especially on the question of slavery. Stephen Douglas, Lincoln's opponent in the famous 1858 debates, argues for popular sovereignty. Let each territory decide for itself. Lincoln calls this a dangerous evasion. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Look at the map from 1856. Free states clustered in the North and West, slave states across the South. The Republicans win 0 Southern states. The Democrats dominate below the Mason-Dixon line. Geography is identity. Identity is ideology. The war comes. The Republicans lead the Union, abolish slavery through the 13th Amendment, grant citizenship and voting rights through the 14th and 15th. They champion federal power, industrial policy, and a vision of national cohesion enforced from Washington. The Democrats, especially in the South, resist at every turn. After the war, they become the party of the Solid South, a white supremacist base that uses violence, intimidation, and legal maneuvering to restore as much of the old order as possible. The Ku Klux Klan operates as a paramilitary arm of Democratic power in many Southern states. Historian Eric Foner, in Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, describes this era as a second founding and a tragically incomplete one. Federal troops withdraw. Reconstruction ends. The South returns to Democratic control, and with it comes Jim Crow, segregation, disenfranchisement, terror. For the next 70 years, if you're black in America, you vote Republican, if you can vote at all. The party of Lincoln is the party of emancipation. The Democrats are the party that built the system designed to undo it. But even as race divides the parties geographically, class begins to complicate the picture. The late 1800s are the Gilded Age. Robber barons, industrial monopolies, railroads stitching the continent together. Republicans become the party of business. High tariffs to protect American industry and the gold standard. Their base includes northern industrialists, urban professionals, and black voters. Democrats, struggling for relevance outside the South, pivot toward agrarian populism. William Jennings Bryan, the great orator of the prairie, delivers his Cross of Gold speech in 1896, attacking Eastern banks and championing farmers and workers. The Democratic Party begins to position itself, hesitantly, inconsistently, as the party of the common man against concentrated wealth. It's a preview of what's coming. The fault lines are shifting. Business versus labor, urban versus rural, federal power versus local control. The parties haven't switched yet, but the pressures are building. October 1929. The stock market collapses. Banks fail. Unemployment reaches 25%. Bread lines stretch around city blocks. The Gilded Age's bill comes due, and Herbert Hoover, Republican, believer in limited government, can't or won't mobilize federal power to address it. Enter Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Democrat, patrician, polio survivor. He promises a New Deal and delivers a revolution in the role of government. Social Security, labor protections, public works, banking regulation, federal relief. The Democrats become the party of the welfare state, organized labor, and activist government. Republicans criticize this as socialism, overreach, an attack on individual liberty and free enterprise. The battle lines are clear. Big government versus small government. Collective security versus personal responsibility. But here's the complication. The crack that will widen into a chasm. Southern Democrats remain segregationist. They support the New Deal's economic programs as long as they preserve white supremacy. Black workers are often excluded from New Deal benefits. Lynching remains unpunished. Ira Katznelson, in Fear Itself, calls this the Southern cage. The New Deal coalition rested on a compromise with racism. Northern Democrats grew more progressive on civil rights. Southern Democrats dug in. The party held together through shared economic interests and FDR's political genius. But the tension was unsustainable. In 1948, President Harry Truman, facing re-election, does something unprecedented. He endorses a civil rights plank at the Democratic National Convention. Desegregation of the military, federal anti-lynching laws, voting protections. The Southern delegates explode. Strom Thurmond of South Carolina leads a walkout and forms the states' rights Democratic Party, the Dixiecrats. They win 4 Deep South states in the general election. The crack becomes visible. The 1950s bring Brown vs. Board of Education, Little Rock, the Montgomery bus boycott. Eisenhower, a Republican, enforces desegregation in Arkansas with federal troops. But he's personally ambivalent, moving slowly. Meanwhile, younger Democrats in the North begin pushing harder. In 1960, John F. Kennedy narrowly wins the presidency, partly thanks to strong black support. His administration inches toward civil rights, but it's his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson of Texas, who becomes the pivot. In 1961, Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act, outlawing segregation in public accommodations and employment discrimination. It's the most significant civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. On the day he signs it, Johnson reportedly tells an aide, "We have lost the South for a generation." He's right, but understates the timeline. That same year, Republicans nominate Barry Goldwater, a senator from Arizona, who voted against the Civil Rights Act. Goldwater isn't personally racist. He's a libertarian who opposes federal overreach, but his vote signals something to Southern whites. This party will prioritize states' rights over integration. Goldwater loses the election badly, but he wins 5 Deep South states that haven't voted Republican since Reconstruction. The map has started to flip. Richard Nixon is watching. In 1968, he runs for president with a calculated message: law and order, opposition to busing, respect for traditional values, and a promise to appoint strict constructionist judges. He never says race directly. He doesn't have to. Historians like Dan Carter, The Politics of Rage, and Kevin Cruz, White Flight, document what becomes known as the Southern Strategy, a deliberate appeal to white Southern resentment over civil rights, framed in the language of states' rights, local control, and resistance to federal mandates. George Wallace, the segregationist governor of Alabama, runs as a third-party candidate in 1968, winning 5 Southern states and demonstrating the electoral power of white backlash. Nixon studies the map. In 1972, he crushes it, flipping the entire South except Texas. The migration accelerates. Southern whites begin leaving the Democratic Party. Black voters, already leaning Democratic, consolidate there. The party of Lincoln has become the party that welcomes those who resent what Lincoln achieved. The 1970s bring another shift: the politicization of evangelical Christianity. For decades, many evangelical leaders stayed out of partisan politics, preaching personal salvation over political engagement. But Roe v. Wade in 1973, the Equal Rights Amendment, and fears about secularism catalyze a movement. Jerry Falwell founds the Moral Majority in 1979, mobilizing evangelicals as a Republican voting bloc. The message: the Democratic Party has become the party of feminism, abortion, secularism, and moral decay. The Republican Party offers traditional values, religious freedom, and a defense of the family. Ronald Reagan, a former Hollywood actor and California governor, seals the deal. He campaigns on small government, strong defense, and cultural conservatism. He speaks the language of evangelical morality and Southern pride without alienating suburban moderates. In 1980, he wins every Southern state except Georgia, Jimmy Carter's home. The South is now Republican. The coalition has completed its migration. White evangelicals, Southern conservatives, business interests, and national security hawks. The Democrats become the party of urban professionals, organized labor, minorities, and secular liberals. The Democrats, staring at Reagan's landslides, recalibrate. Bill Clinton, governor of Arkansas, promises a new Democrat: fiscally responsible, tough on crime, pro-trade, culturally moderate. He's a Southern Democrat in the old mold, but with a new formula. In 1992, Clinton wins, flipping a few Southern states back: Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee. But his agenda, NAFTA, welfare reform, tough on crime bills, alienates the party's progressive base, and doesn't stop the hemorrhaging of white working-class voters, especially in the South and Midwest. By the end of Clinton's presidency, the South is slipping back to Republicans. The realignment isn't just about race anymore. It's about class, culture, and globalization. Factory towns that once voted for FDR's economic programs now feel abandoned by democratic centrism. In 2000, George W. Bush wins barely on the strength of evangelical turnout and a Supreme Court decision. His presidency expands the Republican coalition's reliance on religious voters, faith-based initiatives, opposition to same-sex marriage, the framing of foreign policy in moral terms after 9/11. The electoral map solidifies into the pattern we now recognize. Democrats dominate cities and coasts. Republicans dominate rural areas, the South, and the Great Plains. Polarization isn't just about policy. It's geographic, cultural, tribal. Political scientists like Brady and Hahn document this in Party Polarization in America. Americans are sorting themselves not just by ideology, but by identity. Where you live, what you watch, who you worship with, it all predicts your vote. In 2008, Barack Obama assembles a coalition that looks nothing like FDR's. Urban professionals, young voters, minorities, college-educated whites. He wins Virginia and North Carolina, southern states, but through demographic change and mobilization, not by appealing to white working-class nostalgia. The backlash is swift. The Tea Party emerges, animated by opposition to government spending, healthcare reform, and, though rarely stated openly, the presence of a black president. Republicans sweep the 2010 midterms. In 2016, Donald Trump completes the inversion. He wins the Republican nomination by rejecting the party's free trade, interventionist, and business-friendly orthodoxy. His message is nationalist, populist, and explicitly nostalgic. Make America great again. He wins the Rust Belt, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, by flipping white working-class voters who'd supported Obama or stayed home. Thomas Frank's "What's the Matter with Kansas?" argued that Republicans had convinced working-class voters to vote against their economic interests by emphasizing cultural issues. Trump proves that cultural identity is economic interest for many voters. Jobs, pride, and resentment are inseparable. Meanwhile, the Democrats become increasingly urban, diverse, and educated. Liliana Mason, in Uncivil Agreement, shows how partisan identity has become so powerful that it now overrides policy preferences. People don't ask, "What does this party offer me?" They ask, "Who am I and which team am I on?" Look at the electoral maps side by side, 1860 and 2020. In 1860, Lincoln wins the North and loses the South. He doesn't appear on the ballot in most southern states. The Republican Party is the party of federal power, moral reform, and opposition to the South's social order. In 2020, Trump wins the South and loses the coasts. The Republican Party is the party of states' rights, cultural traditionalism, and opposition to coastal elites. The colors have inverted. The Republican red now covers the lands Lincoln couldn't win. The Democratic blue dominates the territories that once rejected integration. The parties didn't switch overnight. They migrated, generation by generation, realignment by realignment, until the map reflected a new America, one where geography, race, religion, and education predict your politics more than your income or profession. Closing, the mirror. The story of the American Party flip isn't a miracle or a betrayal. It's a mirror. Each generation redraws its moral boundaries and redefines who we are. Parties don't switch overnight. People do. The symbols stay the same. The souls inside them don't. The Republican Party still calls itself the Party of Lincoln. The Democratic Party still claims FDR's legacy. Both are telling the truth. Both are lying. Because Lincoln and FDR were building coalitions for their time, solving their crises, mobilizing their voters. The names endure. The missions evolve. What does this mean for today? It means that the current alignment isn't permanent. It means that the coalitions we think of as natural, evangelicals and business conservatives, minorities and urban liberals, are historical accidents, products of specific moments and specific choices. Future realignments are already beginning. College-educated suburbanites trending Democratic, working-class Hispanics trending Republican. The weather vane is still spinning. Understanding how we changed is the first step to knowing who we are, not who we were in 1860 or 1964 or 2016, but who we are now and who we might become when the compass spins again.